So I'm Carolyn Abramo. I'm the CEO and founder of Pana Low Carbon Economy Investments based in New York City. We are a private equity firm. We're growth equity, and we are in the climate technology space, which is technology that will reduce large scale greenhouse gases in all our real asset sectors. So we talked a lot about real assets today. Earlier this morning, we talked about the macro concerns we have with inflation, rising rates, and commodity prices that are going through the roof. My background is actually in commodities. So I started my career as a natural gas trader almost 25 years ago, and was an energy banker for 15 years before I moved into private equity as an investor. And I think it's really critical to understand the infrastructure that we have in the country and also in the world, and kind of how we got to the point where we are at today, where we clearly still have resource scarcity, and it's been amplified politically currently. And the idea that we need to invest more, and we also need to think about the planet. We need to think about the E of the ESG, and what's the most rational way to do that. And so actually Marty helped to coin the phrase that I've been using a lot, which is Pana as a rational actor in this space. And if you don't mind, Marty, if you can go to that slide.
Yep.
Just to maybe explain, because I think it feels like right now that there is a lot of question about how to deploy a strategy in transition, in ESG. And hopefully this helps a little bit to set the stage.
Which slide number is it?
Go one more. There it is. Okay. So what we're showing here is that really the technologies that we're investing in, and it's all what I'd say later stage. So we don't do any seed investing. We don't do Series A. We usually come in around Series B, C, D, and we're looking for the commercial route or the commercial viability of these technologies. So we're looking for them to be deployed into real estate, industrials, agriculture, and energy. And we look through the spectrum of really what the assets and the infrastructure we have around the world today, and which technologies would benefit them. So and those are really a lot of the ones that are available today, and they are ready for commercial scale, and they will grow, and we can deploy billions of dollars into projects for them and manufacturing, and we can get to our Paris Accord goals, which is to not increase surface temperatures by more than 1.5 degrees over the next 30 years by focusing on these technologies that we have today. But we also are investing in the technologies of tomorrow. These are technologies on the right side that have really advanced dramatically outside of the lab. They have small demo facilities, but they're maybe just on the cusp. There's no revenue yet, which is a really big differentiator for us. We look at revenue positive companies, but with the tailwinds of investing in GHG reduction technologies by corporations, basically every corporation in the world has to report on their ESG, or their scope 1 through 3 emissions, and pretty much everyone has a target to reduce emissions for the next 30 years. And that's really translating into money that's coming into the space. So there's a humongous tailwind there. And then there's the government, which, we don't want to wait for, but, there is definitely movements in the US, and there's been movements in Europe quicker than the US to have more robust incentives, more tax credits for things like carbon capture, even for recycling a lot of plastics. So that's there. And I'd say we're very close to the tipping point for that. But right now, again, on the left side, we can focus on the technologies that and the companies that have high operating margins don't need those incentives. They are governed by high revenues. There's green premiums for the products that they sell. Consumers want them. These are basically materials that we would replace, like, plastic spoons and knives, and pretty much are the clothes that we wear. Not the nylon comes from fossil fuels. I mean, pretty much our life is very much, our consumer lives are embedded in this. So we do focus on the right side as well, but we let investors know that it might take longer for there to be revenue, for there to be earnings, for there to be a large scale deployment. And so that might be a 10-year horizon or 12-year horizon versus the left side, which is more, within the next couple of years that we're looking for EBITDA positive. So that's just to explain, how we're thinking about the space. And so how that translates into our investments. So we have a fund right now that we're
Caroline,
raising.
before we go there,
Yep.
You didn't do an introduction of who you are and what your background is, where you worked.
Okay.
So you were a
sure.
trader at one point, right? You're
Yep.
an energy trader. So maybe
Yep.
you can do that first, and then we'll go into the fund.
Sure. So yeah, so I mentioned that I was a natural gas trader. I worked. Yes, I did work at Enron. And someone did. I think someone mentioned earlier about, maybe that was another day of talking to someone else talking about working at Lehman. Maybe it was Luis this morning, and just saying that the experience that you have going through something like that is talk about the knowing what to do next time, or seeing social and governance. So, I focus very much on the E, and I could talk it to how I focus on the S and the G, but a lot of experience that I have and my team has. And then I transitioned to be an energy banker for 15 years at Credit Suisse, at BNP Paribas. And then I moved to the buy side, and I worked at Lazard. I worked at Carlyle and then Lazard, where I was a portfolio manager at Lazard for their real assets platform. So, and that's where I jumped out and started Pana in the fall of 2019, because I saw really the low carbon space as a huge opportunity. So I look at it as a growth sector, because I look at these green premiums as revenue. We need to make a lot of things. Carbon has a value. You can trade it in the marketplace. Our experience in commodity trading is very helpful for that. In fact, we have some of our LPs are corporates. So we have a lot of corporates that we do advisory work for and are coming into our fund, and we're doing co-investments with people like Cargill, Glencore, Griffith Foods, but they want us to deliver carbon credits to them in addition to a financial return. And so our experience in the commodity markets and infrastructure markets is essential to us understanding if these technologies will work. There's always technology risk still in what we're looking at, but it's in going from something small into something big. So we now need 6 projects. We need lots of, we talked about storage assets, our gentleman with the storage, and I was like, we could repurpose a lot of Kmart's into battery manufacturing facilities. I have a lot of ideas for that, but that's okay. We can go with storage for now, but that's essential.
And so just to preface what your discussion of your fund, John Arnold, who's an ex-Enron trader, I guess, and a hedge fund manager, he's like a billionaire. He said today that the U.S. government should use the Defense Production Act to increase natural gas production.
So John and I worked together at Enron, so we're contemporaries. There's still hope for me now in the next 20 years to maybe get to his level, but yes, we need more resources. And I started my career 25 years ago with natural gas as a replacement for coal in terms of a clean fuel. And the truth is, it is still clean. It's much cleaner than coal. And with a lot of, you'll read in the paper, so here in California, where we're adding a lot of renewables to the grid, but unfortunately we have to upgrade the grid system to be able to accept those renewables, that intermittency. It only works when it's sunny or when it's windy, and gas is actually one of the the base load fuels that we still use. So there is a need, and as we think about the developed world here in the US and Europe, and then the emerging world, and that they need to play some catch up to where we are, and the style of life that we have, and having energy and having enough food and cement, steel. We need all of those things. But in terms of some of the social issues that surround climate, there's one of improving the lives around the world. But great point about the what they call the hard to decarbonize sectors. So and it's I feel like well-worn academic research. The Drawdown Group for 10 years has been talking about which sectors we need to decarbonize. So for us at Pana, it was it's relatively well, it's easy to see where we should be spending our time. And our team has spent all of our careers in those very industries and in chemicals and cement and steel. So we do understand the companies, we understand, where they're at right now. And now it's about locating the technologies that they're going to invest in and they're going to deploy. So really important. The other part about our team that's important is that we are fiduciaries. So coupled with our commodity and infrastructure experiences that we've run private equity portfolios, infrastructure portfolios, we've done lots of projects. So we have a track record, which is great because none of this has a really robust track record. And most of the impact areas are new and it is very challenging. I'm not going to lie, being a new fund and a new platform in new investments. And so there is a bit of a delta there in terms of traditional asset management and, and the kind of track records that they would like and the kind of assets that they want to invest in. And they said, well, Carolyn, show me how you're a plastic stuff clean fuel company, like how did that do 10 years ago? And I was like, well, it didn't exist, as did most of the things. But there is a track record with a lot of like solar and wind, which I talk a lot about, where with a lot of the technologies that we're developing in waste to value, in material science, it's really where we were 20 years ago with solar and wind in terms of the technologies. It was expensive then for solar and wind. The government tried to come in with incentives and it was, a bit rocky. You had early stage, you had venture funds, you had families, and families are very key in this. We're early stage investors. You had a lot of what we see today with batteries and even, carbon capture, binary outcomes, half failed, half succeeded, but finally we got there. So we were able to kind of move and de-risk the technology so that it was lower cost and it was deployed. You were able to sell long-term power prices for, 20, 30 years. So that created a hedge in the market. Bankers were able to lend to projects and at low cost debt, which is really where we want to go to with all the things we're looking at. So now 20 years later, developed, solar and wind projects have a 6% return, which is not really probably where folks in this room and on the call are maybe prioritizing. Whereas what we're looking at is, our growth equity IRR targets are 25%. And we're coupling that with large scale reduction of greenhouse gases. And we're saying punchline is that, you can do well and do good at the same time. And so, we're proving that, by these investments and, good exits, to infrastructure, to corporates and to the public markets. So that's the trajectory that we're looking at. And we have the team to do it and we have the pipeline. So the good news is that we have many deals to do. We have a fund that we're raising for right now. It's a $150 million fund that we could cover at least 6 or 7 times over with our pipeline of companies. And we chose 150 because we can allocate to 6 or 7 companies, $10 to $30 million, which the rounds that we're getting into, Series B, C, they're usually minimum 50 million and they're going up to 500 million because a lot of our companies, they need to build projects. And so either they're going to build them themselves or have a partner. They're going to maybe license their technology. And those projects are pretty expensive. So for us, we, by design, created an entry point of growth equity where it would scale into projects and it would scale into hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, because that's really what we need, for the Paris Accord goals. So that's a bit of the Pana platform.
Do you have a first close target or?
So we're looking at, so we're making our first close at the end of this month of $50 million. There's still room for all of you. And we're going to close the fund this year. So by the end of this year. And then we couple the fund with a co-investment program so that we can upsize our tickets to the companies so that we could lead rounds, because they are quite large rounds. And we can have then investors pick, which companies if they're more interested. And I can talk to you a little bit about some of the companies.
And you're presently investing as special purpose vehicles right now in deals that you do find that are too attractive to ignore?
Yes. So, and if you wouldn't mind moving ahead, I can tell you about our first company we invested in last year was with a family office in Chicago, was our co-investor. And we did as a special purpose vehicle. So it was a Series B. It was a company called Braven Environmental. and they convert plastics.
Is it this slide?
That's a good one. We can show just kind of some of the, some of the subsectors that we have developed. And sorry, it's so small, but hopefully you have the deck at home. But Braven was our first investment last year. Series B, $50 million round. We led the round with $21 million. Braven converts plastic waste and rigid plastics, so really hard to process kind of stuff, into a clean fuel that they sell directly to refiners. So Chevron, Phillips, Dow, Lyondell, who pay a premium for it, 50% premium over fossil fuel based product that they can put through their refiners. And then now they can meet some of their carbon goals that they put out into the market. And then they turn around and process it, and they can sell it to packaged goods companies like Mars, Unilever, Colgate, Palmolive, who have an insatiable demand for this material because it would replace fossil fuel plastics to help them with their carbon goals. And they'll pay a premium for it. And what's good about this route is that the cost of goods sold, or the percentage that fuel is about 0.1% of cost of goods sold for let's say a plastic fork or a little tray. So the consumer really doesn't see it. So there's a huge markup, and this is where Braven is able to have great operating margins, even without incentives. So there's no plastics incentives in the US right now. And they have low CapEx because they have modular construction. So they don't have a big refiner, mountaintop refiner that costs $500 million. They have $20 million mini refiners that they cluster, and that they can actually construct them where the waste is, which is their feedstock, which they get for free now, but that we model in that eventually they'll have to pay for it, and that they can then sell it at a premium to the refiners, and they could also build their modular refiners right where the refiners are. So it's one of the concepts that we use a lot in our risk management and due diligence. So if you actually, Marty, if you go a couple slides
down.
Yeah. So that's great. Nope, go back. Thank you. So just to see a little bit how we do our due diligence. So we created our risk score at Pana. It's called the Pana risk score, which we trademarked because we wanted to be able to talk to investors. So I mentioned families have been really at the forefront of early days with climate technology. And we get a lot of reverse inquiry. We get tons of families that show us their portfolio. They said, we've invested in this. What do you think of this? What do you think of this versus like if it was a geothermal investment versus a nuclear investment versus a sustainable fertilizer company. So we've developed a risk score that we look across 5 major risks of the investment. Development risk being a key one, execution, commodity risk, regulatory risk, and funding risk. And we score them 1 to 10. Green is like 1 to 3, and then yellow, and then red. And you won't see a lot of red, at least in our approved deals that would come into our fund. But they do exist because, as I said, we do look at a lot of opportunities that people show us. But this was a way that we could really talk to investors about the different landscape, because there is actually a lot of subsectors within climate. So this is how Braven looks. And so we did that outside the fund, and now we're focused on the fund. And we have, like I said, quite a big pipeline. If you move to the next one, Marty. So the next two are 2 companies. So Braven's going into a Series C this year. So we'll be raising more money then, and we could put a piece into our fund. And then we have Anuvia, which is a sustainable fertilizer company. Another, what I call waste to value company, because instead of the plastics, we use organics that's in the waste fields, waste in landfills. So that's when I'm sure you love to recycle. Everyone loves to separate their garbage, and it's like it takes the whole night. But I can tell you that it's for good use. So the organics would go to a company like Anuvia, which with their technology, then they can transform that into a sustainable fertilizer. And we say sustainable because they're not using as much nitrogen, which is a big carbon footprint, GHG footprint. But also the organics help us to revitalize the soil. So it actually is regenerating the soil, which we've, across the world, we really farm the heck out of for our land. So the yields and the crop yields for row crops is actually dramatically improved, and they have tons of field studies to show that. And Anuvia is also growth stage. It's commercially viable. They have long-term contracts with Nutrien, Growmark, all the big farmer conglomerates. We don't sell directly to farmers. So that's another example, and they're ready to roll. They're in a Series C right now. It's scale. So yes, if we, and that's like for the prior example with Braven, so like selling directly to the refiners, like they can buy. So I should have mentioned Braven is producing in a small facility outside of North Carolina, outside of Raleigh. They produce about 1 million gallons a year of this sustainable fuel, which I should mention looks a lot like ultra low sulfur diesel, but they need 100 million gallons a year for 10 years for one contract, and then another, they have 3 contracts, which they need at least 300 million gallons a year. So they have to build a lot of these facilities. Similar with Anuvia, if we go to the farmer conglomerates, so that we're looking at very large volumes, and then they do all the marketing themselves. Sir.
I'm not a natural gas drinker, but I've heard that fertilizer requires 70% of the cost of manufactured fertilizer.
Yes, continue. And Ukraine and what's happening. Yeah. So, and this is, and we
maybe you can repeat the question for the people
Oh,
online.
sure. So, so our colleague was just, said 70% of the traditional way to produce fertilizer would be to use natural gas, which is true. And that's actually how I started covering all of the big fertilizer companies, potash, and that became Agrium in my natural gas days. Yeah, I mean, it's terrible. I mean, we have to get things from point A to point B. Like, this is the reality. This is what's it's sometimes hard to talk about in the technology space when, we're thinking, I love everyone's presentations. I'm enamored. But with a quick adoption with technologies, it's in an app or it's software or services. This stuff, like, we have to build some stuff. We have to get things places.
So this is almost like chip manufacturing domestically.
Totally. And I would say, and there's a huge political theme here because what's happening across the country. And also there's a theme of jobs. There's a competition with China. I mean, before we've even done that path, that was one of our key goals at Pana, is that we were creating manufacturing here. And that is, it's showing up in the infrastructure bill, and there's going to be, more incentives for battery manufacturing. And so this is all happening. So we just have to find stuff that works, and it's imperative that we do so. And I guess my experience is, many years doing this and going through what we did with renewables, over a decade and a half ago, is that, we don't have a lot of time on this topic. And so we really, we need to put our best foot forward. And that's why we chose the growth stage. And that's why, it maybe, Marty, if you can go up a couple slides.
Can I just ask you one question?
Mhm.
A lot of in your methodology, you talk a lot about strategic exits, like to the acquisitions. Can you talk about who the likely acquirers?
Yep, and that's the slide I wanted you to go to. You read my mind.
Okay,
so
is it which slide?
Nope,
This one?
nope. One more.
Up or down?
Up. Sorry, one more. Yes. Okay. So these are just some of the characteristics of our investments that we wanted to lay out. To Marty's point about we're very exit aware. That's the last one on the slide, is that, because we have so much interest from corporations and so much money, they're a huge exit source. And we're modeling to 5 to 7 years exit. We are not counting on the SPAC market at this point for public exits. However, there's still a lot of money for SPACs, and we actually work with many that ask us for commercially ready companies that have revenue so that they'll make it through the process. So, there are such companies that exist, but the exits are very important, very clear, so that we could get to our target IRRs. And backing up in terms of some of the other criteria, which, makes us, uniquely suited to do what we do, is we understand the infrastructure, and we worked with the companies, the precursors or technology companies for years, and I have covered the energy space almost 30 years and sat down, in company meetings and lent money to every major real asset company, and was able to use capital to deploy into shale and LNG and renewables. So know lots of those folks, but we also have this robust, VC community that's been operating for 20 years. In fact, I have a colleague here, Jason Holt, who has been doing that and can tell you about the history and of those investments. So we have a whole pool of companies that have made it through those early stages and they're ready for this commercial stage now. So we are the recipients of that. We can be the exit or the continual growth capital when those VCs run out of bandwidth in terms of, and there are people like Breakthrough Energy Ventures, like here in town, or Prime. Literally we have EIP, we have dozens and dozens of groups, Jason, that we partner with. And then, we can lead rounds, and there's, I won't make Marty go back, but the TAM on this is incredible. So we have a huge opportunity. There are a lot of bulge bracket asset managers that are raising capital for this very growth equity space. So BlackRock, Blackstone, TPG, Rise right in town. But they're not deploying much capital right now because the guidelines don't really match up to what their investment committees are used to. If they're doing large scale infrastructure, they don't want to take technology risk. They want the company to be EBITDA positive. They want them to be on their sixth project. And that's just not what we have here in terms of these opportunities. So there's a really great opportunity for us to lead the rounds and really set the stage for milestones and economics. And then again, our companies are all revenue positive. We're looking for impact. The fund it's a 10-year fund, and we're looking for a gigaton or more of carbon reduction over the life of that fund. Another aspect of the fund I mentioned earlier is that since we're getting in with that growth equity stage with the company, and we're sitting at the table with them, and we're very, very hands-on with the companies to help them with their revenue model. So when they're thinking about the projects, we would get the right of first offer, to help fund the project. And we could help them to say, what's the right mix of build, own, operate versus licensing and royalties. So that's a real advantage to getting in at the equity side of the table, rather than being project debt or project equity, which is really where the big infrastructure assets, they all sit there, and that's what they're waiting for, is the companies to get to that point.
So, a couple of questions. So what's the, so obviously they've got a project that's going on where they need to get something. You have an off taker where there's a contract to provide it. They can't get financing off of that off taker. So what percent is equity versus debt or financing?
Yeah. So in the models of our valuation models, which look like any other company model, the revenue is predicated on them being able to build enough manufacturing facilities many times in order to get that revenue, and that the projects would go 50 equity, 50 debt, maybe scale to 70-30. And there is really attractive debt in the marketplace. I mean, I don't want to say people are giving it away, but there's green bonds, there's green financing, there's 30-year financing out of Europe. So if the companies can just get to that stage, which we're pushing them to, then the economics they do dramatically improve for the companies.
Great. There was a comment from the audience from Blake Singer. Yeah, you're basically getting proven technology solutions and companies to the stage where they get to the size they can be acquired strategically. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that, a lot of our companies are going to get bought out by, Cargill or Shell or, Glencore, or all these folks. Well, and right now they have more money than ever. And I have to say, when we, but that's why I really enjoy hearing all of that, because there's a lot of similar themes. And now, when I started Pana in the fall of 19, and then we had COVID, and in March of 2020, oil went to -40, and companies were not in a great space to do this, and they are right now have that capital, and they have the ambition. Like I say, I spend a lot of time in Houston. I was there a couple of weeks ago. The third coast, they call it. It's very interesting. Anyway, I know I'm in California now, so this is why I come to I must come see my friends across the country, because there are different modes of thought, but I would say where most of the energy companies and the chemical companies are, I mean, there's tremendous ambition and will to do it. And they have the capital and they have the skill set, which is really the most important piece of this, is that, not like all of your companies are run by scientists and engineers. And, I don't find that many that have built a lot of stuff. So I'm looking for partnership. I'm looking for the corporates that are going to take that burden off. They're going to help supplement with 1,000-person tech team, groups that have done geothermal before, maybe abandon it, maybe, it's like P&G and they're like, yeah, we had that recycling technology and we just put it on the shelf because plastic is better. So there's reasons why all these things happen, but now we're at the point where it's all very much critical, mission critical.
And most companies you're looking at are like, the real issue is how fast it can scale. It's a race to scaling.
Exactly. And listen, more, government incentives, better price debt will help with that. But it's really this hump of this growth equity, which unfortunately people call this stage like the valley of death, because it's so hard for companies in that late stage venture to find their market. And if you actually, Marty, if you wouldn't mind going to the first slide, not my letter, which right here. Thank you so much. In terms of current trends, we talk about the difference because, of course, everyone asks me and they're like, you've been around a while, Carolyn, why is it different now? And I said, well, it's different because the market is really pulling these technologies forward. These corporations are looking for it. They know what they need, rather than a technology company saying, well, who's going to buy me? What's my application? And there's so much less of that. In fact, there's like multiple applications. So if we can give more money to tech founders and they can think about material science, they can think about applications that actually straddle healthcare and biology as well as climate. So that's a really big difference this time.
So you mentioned the value of death. Are you seeing cram downs in valuations?
So, and that's great. We were talking about earlier about, and Sequoia came out with, they're just like, valuations are so high. And we are seeing elements of that in our space. And I would say more in the early stage rounds, like in the venture to Series A, because my take on it is that the TAM is like, it's all there and it's all possible. Absolutely. That utility is going to adopt, of course, if you build it, they will come. And that is just not the way this happens. But enough of the companies, enough battery companies have been test piloting with with huge hyperscalers for a couple, and that's Zinc 5 is in our book after an Uvia, that, now they're ready. Now they're writing the check, so, but that early stage, you get the benefit of the doubt, and when you get to commercial stage, that's when things start to get rocky. So we do see where many companies have raised way too much money and that their commercial performance or operational milestones have not been met enough. So that's another reason why it's, our team is important with our skills to make sure that we're getting in at the right valuations and that we're going to help the companies through with all of these pieces of corporate partnership, of their, additional management, CTO staff, CFO, like all these things that they need.
Do you have any executives in residence or stuff like that, or private equity partners who are not part of the GP who help you find those relationships and partnering activities? We do.
So we have what we call operating partners. So a lot of folks that I've worked with in my career that are working on carbon capture projects right now, we have a family we work with that owns some natural gas, what was natural gas storage, and they're repurposing it. We have operating partners in the refining corridor, in waste fuels, looking at shipping fuels, looking at sustainable aviation fuels. We have partners in hydrogen. We have geothermal partners. So essentially, we leverage our team with experts, with subject matter experts, and mostly people that are actually doing the projects, because they can help us with the project economics. Because right now, with supply chain issues and labor cost issues, that we get a model and says, well, right, we can make this much revenue to 2027. We said, right, well, you have to build this stuff. And so we look at this, Jason and I were talking about this. They say, well, we can build it in a year. And we say, wait, okay, so should we iterate that to 2 years? And should we say it's going to cost twice as much? So, what EPC should we call to figure this out? Like, if there's a lot going on, and that all leads to evaluation. But if we have partners that are actually in the field doing it, then we have a good idea of like what it's actually costing today.
We've got a few more minutes.
Yep. So I guess in summary,
Oh, we have one more question.
You're working on here. A lot of these things have to do with, because there's such a unique background. Do you see this? Do you see that your counterparties are worried about $8 a gallon fuel in this country, and they're starting to sort of gear these days be more impactful, or are they just? Is that $8 a gallon fuel? That sort of the inflection point right now where it's very successful. Depending on how long that $8.
It's a great observation. It drives a couple of, I think, positives, is that, the alternatives look a lot more inexpensive. So if you're driving your electric vehicle and, and I live in Manhattan and I don't have a car, but I was in my friend's Tesla, and, either that you're charging for free or you're charging at a fraction of what it costs, versus traditional gasoline. So competitive wise, it's looking, quite attractive. And then also the companies with the know-how have that capital. And it's, I think, creating a move more towards the left side of my slide of rational actor, of where the inclusive part of our infrastructure and maybe some understanding or some concession that we actually need those assets for a couple more years, so yeah, like, so, and that, and that if the technology exists to upgrade them and to reduce greenhouse gases, it's almost like we can have our cake and eat it too. And I think that wasn't necessarily the path that a lot of investors were going down in prior years, and certainly in Europe. Oh, no, that's okay. No, exactly.
What you're saying, to go kind of global macro kind of thing.
Mhm.
The World Bank just came up with not a likelihood, but said that we should prepare for perhaps global stagflation for several years. How will that affect all of this? Because it could affect it positively, but also,
it will affect me. And I was trying to reconcile our discussion earlier today about the public ESG companies, and I could get back into how we see ourselves as ESG, but higher interest rates. I mean, that goes to project financing. The lack of of labor. I mean, wage disinflation. That's all negative, because we have to build some things, and that's where the technology straight up, or more services and software, that will be an easier route. And we need those things because we need to monitor GHGs, we need to be able to verify them, we need to trade them, but we also need to do this stuff. So to your point, yes, that is definitely will have a slowdown. And that's when I was talking about our financial modeling, how we were trying to incorporate that, with some reality, because, it will cost more and it will take longer.
more of it. One of my favorite saying is the perfect beat. And you seem, I know people, is nuclear wonderful? No, it has issues for waste and waste. I built the small bankers trust back in the day.
I was BT too. Yeah, so Marty and I have talked about that.
But
I spilled the beans with that one.
Yeah, but there are issues with it, but it doesn't produce any carbon.
Well,
except the housing, concrete stuff that actually productive.
Well, that's why. Thank you for bringing that. So last session I was with Marty in New York. Someone, I think it was Luis, who's like, I'm I'm doubling down on nuclear. And so I didn't say anything, but we, and you'll see on my slide is that we've evaluated, at least a dozen or so nuclear technologies, more modular construction SMRs. And, but regulatory is our big hurdle. So that gets a red for us on when we look at those companies. And it's unfortunate, one of the companies we have evaluated, terrestrial, which we have several of our families that are invested in. We did not invest up in Canada. They were up for a big contract with the Canadian government to move towards their more modular, streamlined, cost-effective technology versus like old nuclear, and they didn't win the contract. They are, but they've got decommission, they've got upgrading issues, like, where they have environmental issues there. It's been very slow for them to do new builds. So I would just say the pace is rather slow, but to your point, yes, it is a carbon-free solution. And that's why, we look at every avenue, and we're here to be, I guess, neutral on that risk scoring, so that we at least can create a framework for our LPs so that, they have a basis of comparison.
I think they've been building a new nuclear power plant in Georgia, and it's come in first stage 5 times over budget. So
there's never one that hasn't. Of all the ones ever built, it never came in on time.
Yep.